The Mythic Dawn, real cults, apocalyptic belief, and the madness of Oblivion. In the Elder Scrolls IV Oblivion, the Aedra and Daedra are real and have real-world effects. This leads some citizens of Tamriel to do some pretty wild things. The Mythic Dawn is one such example. They don't just open the gates to hell, they want to. Cultists obsessed with bringing about their prophet's vision are sadly not just a product of Bethesda and video games, but also sit true in our reality as well. Today, we're diving into the uncomfortable parallels between the Mythic Dawn and real-life doomsday cults. The game might be older than I care to admit, but cults are even older, and I thought this could be fun. Sit back, relax, and get ready to hear some pretty intense stuff. Oh, and trigger warning, this is a video about death, abuse, violence, and drawing parallels between in-game and real-life evils. If that's not your cup of tea, I don't blame you, but you have now been warned. Charismatic leadership and prophecy. At the heart of every cult is a prophet, someone who says they've found the truth and demands your faith. For the Mythic Dawn, that man is Mankar Cameron. Cameron presents himself as a visionary, drawing from the Daedric texts known as the Mysterium Xarxes, a series of books allegedly authored by Mehrunes Dagon himself. Cameron interprets its teachings to claim that Tamriel is a false construct, and only through its destruction can a truer reality be achieved. Cults usually have to center around a person who is so convinced, so dogmatic in their views, that others gravitate towards them. Some through sheer persuasion, but most through isolation from strong social bonds. It's well documented that those who are most likely to join a cult are also the ones who have the least outside of the cult going for them. One potential reason this works is when faced with a choice between the unknown, directionlessness, and being alone, or working towards clear goals with like-minded people who are willing to accept and welcome you. The answer's pretty clear. The charismatic leader fills the void that causes so much internal stress. Quick side note, if at any point you're thinking this sounds a bit like organized religion, then I'm personally in agreement with you, but that's out of scope of this video. Maybe I'll be brave enough to tackle that another time. In our world, we don't have Aedra and Daedra, but we certainly do have charismatic leaders who are able to draw a following. One such example was Jim Jones. Born in Indiana in 1931. Like many people, he was brought up in a Christian-centric society and was actually ordained as a Christian minister by the Independent Assemblies of God. This was the start of his allure to people following him personally, with this pseudo-authority and confidence. Interestingly enough for the time, he claimed to be quite liberal in many of his personal views. He was outspoken about racism and was heavily involved in many civil rights movements. This, though, I believe to be a bit of a ploy to make him seem much more likeable when compared to a discriminatory regime, and effectively worked to increase his appeal for his later cult following. He had openly admitted that he idealized many notorious sociological figures, including Hitler, but in the same breath would claim his allegiance to ideals of Gandhi. It was around this time that his claims of divinity began, and throughout the remainder of his life seemed to make it his personal mission to obtain the loyalty and belief from as many people as he could. He employed a variety of tactics to do this, including attending traditional Christian church meetings and sowing discord, outright attacking others for disagreeing with him, and deploying vicious, abusive tactics to those who did, all in an effort to keep himself at the center of attention. In conjunction with this, he also constructed his own church, well, commune, really, in Guyana, South Africa in 1974, marketing it as free from the oppression of the state. This, again, lended itself to welcoming all those who felt as though they were outcasts from traditional society. He forced his followers to live there with him, and eventually had many hundreds of people take residency there. Of course, these systems of abuse and control only became stronger, further brainwashing his followers of his divine righteousness. Eventually, his notoriety and poor decisions would catch up with him. In 1978, he hired Mark Lane and Donald Freed, infamous JFK assassination conspiracy theorists, and quickly fell under scrutiny of the government. He was suspicious of everything, so created what he called White Nights. This was a display of their commune's military readiness, where an alarm would go off in the middle of the night, and guards armed with weapons and the whole place would collect together, and simulations of firefights and warfare would commence. One of these instances reportedly lasted up to 6 days. The commune were not told they were simulations until they were finished, however, which then led to arguably his most heinous crimes. On 2 of these White Nights, the commune had agreed on a vote. Not knowing that this was being simulated, the people agreed to mass suicide rather than subjugation by the government. This led to a rehearsal dinner of sorts where everyone, including the children, lined up and either willingly, or by force from others, drank cyanide. Again, this turned out to be a simulation, only made known to them after their loyalty was made clear and everyone had ingested the poison. Unfortunately, one night, there was no more simulation. In late 1978, Congressman Leo Ryan attended the commune to investigate the reports of abuse. Under Jones's orders, he was shot and killed. This sent him and the camp into a panic, and eventually into forcing everyone to consume the cyanide for real. 909 people, including nearly 300 children, were forced to swallow poison, and this time there was no rehearsal. Jones himself opted for a bullet to the head, escaping justice and penance for his crimes. Whilst the victims of Jim Jones received no reparations, thankfully in the fictional world of the Elder Scrolls, we have more say in the matter. Mankar Cameron is charismatic, powerful, abusive, but ultimately mortal. The hero of Kvatch can, and does, slay him for his actions. But the repercussions of the Mythic Dawn are felt long after his demise. We can even see in the events of Skyrim that sleeper agents exist, and a museum has been created to memorialise the event. The drive, determination, and abusiveness of a charismatic leader has far-reaching and long-lasting consequences. Esoteric teachings and initiation. The Mythic Dawn doesn't hand you a sword, it hands you books. Specifically, the 4 commentaries on the Mysterium Xarxes, which are riddled with metaphor and hidden meanings. To join the cult, initiates must decode these texts to locate hidden lairs and prove their spiritual worth. The books range in difficulty to obtain in Oblivion. The first couple are comparatively rare. Whilst they do appear in the odd bookstore and collection, they're not exactly mainstream knowledge, and thanks Sithis for that. The latter 2 books in the series, however, are much harder to locate, with only a couple instances available to find at all in Cyrodiil. Feeling like you're smart enough, resourceful enough, faithful enough to not only locate this knowledge, but also act upon it and keep it secret from others, adds to the exclusive nature of the cult. In Oblivion, this leads to adorning the hood and cloak and jumping into a lovely lecture from Cameron himself. But this method of obscured knowledge mirrors real-world cult tactics. Scientology is one of the world's most renowned cults, with some major celebrity endorsements. Whilst its existence differs greatly from the Mythic Dawn, everyone and their Tom Cruise knows about Scientology, it shares some similarities in hidden knowledge, known as the Operating Thetan. The Operating Thetan, or OT, is basically a series of levels of knowledge controlled by the Scientologist Church that allegedly contains information on the spirit, time, space, the body, and basically every aspect of life. The secrets behind each of its 8 levels are locked away from outsider knowledge before earning them. This leads to exclusivity, separation, and a feeling of being in the know that continues to perpetuate the cycle of locking you within their various levels. The information is only allowed to be accessed in certain instances, such as paying the many thousands of dollars to earn your knowledge within a locked room, and if they must be transported, only in a locked briefcase handcuffed to your wrist at all times. Oh, and of course, no speaking to others, replicating it, or otherwise sharing the information outside of the church. Whilst this hasn't exactly gone to plan with the many massive breaches for Scientology, the Mythic Dawn did do much better on this front. Their knowledge was only common to the people when it was far too late and literal portals to hell, okay, Oblivion, but what's the difference really, were opened across Tamriel. The use of obscure teachings increases dependence on the leader and isolates members intellectually. In Oblivion, we're smart enough to piece the clues together and understand Mankar's plans, but the followers have to rely on the readings and teachings of his sermons to understand more. He locks the knowledge away behind his delivery of it, and the rarity of the final editions in the series. The followers are forced to see it from his perspective, and only his. Us versus them. The cult mentality. Cults divide the world into us and them. The Mythic Dawn teaches that the mortal plane is a prison created by the false gods, and that only through allegiance to Mehrunes Dagon can one be freed. This cosmic dualism portrays the Septon dynasty and the Empire as part of the lie, while the Mythic Dawn are the chosen few who see the truth. Now, look, the anti-capitalist people should be entitled to food, water and shelter for free part of me tells me of my hypocrisy a little bit here. Things definitely feel very us versus them in our own world too. The ultra-wealthy and politicians only making beds for themselves at everyone else's expense. It feels very much like division has never been greater. That said, I'm not trying to start a cult, or believe that only I have the answers to our problems. Mankar Cameron both claims that he has the solution in his books, and is simultaneously the only one that can deliver them from this mess they're in, requiring the death of all in the Septim bloodline, weakening the barriers between the planes of existence, and ultimately destruction of everything on Nirn. Big difference. At least in the Elder Scrolls, it's clear that the Daedra do exist, so it's much more understandable when they place belief in the words in these texts. I mean, it's still insane, but there's logic there at least. Unfortunately, in the real world, this narrative is one that is weaponized fairly frequently. For example, Heaven's Gate. Heaven's Gate in the US in the 1990s believed Earth was corrupt and doomed. Now, to be fair, that bit is understandable. What makes no sense at all, logically, is that only their members would ascend to a spaceship and transcend human limitations before it all ended. This was a core doctrine of the Heaven's Gate movement, which led in an unfortunate way to a similar end to Jim Jones's cult, a mass suicide pact being followed through. On the eve of their planned ascent from their physical forms, the followers of this particular cult opted to use substances to slowly make them unconscious, and while the drugs were taking effect, fix plastic bags around their heads to asphyxiate themselves. When the police who found them arrived, upon close investigation, none of the 39 dead seemed to have any signs of violence upon them. This quite chillingly indicated that they'd all agreed to do this with relatively little threat required. It just goes to show that when a cult manages to get its claws into someone's mind, their soul, that people can be convinced of truly horrendous things for fruitless outcomes. The us versus them mentality is pretty evident in Oblivion by the Mythic Dawn, considering they literally assassinate the Emperor and many others, and try to kill the hero of Kvatch at basically every available opportunity. Moreover, the belief in the Daedra's will and the teachings of Mehrunes Dagon has the Mythic Dawn convinced that paradise awaits them upon destruction of Nirn. So anyone preventing this, or not actively seeking the same objective, is clearly against the interests of everyone, and needs to be eliminated. Reflection. When you confront the Mythic Dawn, you're not just fighting a man and his followers. You're fighting the will of the Daedra, the allure of power, and the pull, drive, and intent of a belief system that works against everything good. If this was not a game, if this was a real-world cult, it's not hard to see how people could fall into the same trap. Many religions already utilize the idea of a utilitarian paradise after death, and many more cults have weaponized this already. Oblivion might be fantasy, but Mankar Cameron and the Mythic Dawn echo reality. Thanks for watching. It's been a while since I've uploaded, and I'll revisit the Reading the Lore series again soon. But for now, I've enjoyed spending too much time comparing real-world evil and video game evil making this. If you have any ideas for a topic you'd like covered, drop me a comment. I legitimately read every single comment on all of my videos, and they are all appreciated. See you next time.